Hello, I'm CB Emmer Productions. Today we're here to look at one of the laughingstocks of the film world, an area where the majority of filmmakers that try to do this type of thing haven't really been able to crack the code for decades at this point: video game movies. These two entertainment formats can't seem to click together, but with a couple of recent hits in the video game movie subgenre, and having a promising future slate of both adaptations of movies and TV shows, it seems like we may enter a golden age of video game adaptations in the near future, similar to what comic book films went through and still continue to go through. The main reason why I'm here today is because the latest video game adaptation in the 2021 bloody reboot of Mortal Kombat just got released a few days ago as of time of this recording. And considering the fact that this will be the latest video game adaptation, as in terms of the mainstream stuff, for the coming months until we get that Resident Evil reboot coming out Thanksgiving weekend, I think. Great movie to bring the family to, I guess. I feel like it's finally time to do, once again, a giant ranking list that most YouTubers haven't even covered yet. Ranking all the mainstream video game movies from worst to the best, and see how many of these are actually good, and the bad ones, we'll see what happens. So to break it down before we get into this list, for this view I'm going to be using the North American library of the mainstream theatrical video game movies that have been released over the past, 20-30 years. I'm not going to include any foreign stuff simply because there's a lot of it out there, mainly animated stuff, and because there's so many of them and a lot of them are actually quite hard to track down and you really can't even find copies of in the States. And I don't want to be inconsistent and just cherry pick certain, animated films like the Pokemon movies, which won't be on this list apart from Detective Pikachu, so we can level the playing field a little bit. And along with that, I won't be including any direct-to-video video game movies apart from sequels to theatrical movies, because there's always so much crap in this list. And lastly, this list will be exclusively about video game adaptation movies. I won't be including any video game homage movies, as I like to call them. Movies that are video game centric but aren't necessarily based on the video game. They're more about celebrating video games as a whole and nostalgia and stuff like that. So stuff like Wreck-It Ralph or Pixels or The Wizard or Serenity from 2019. Which I just reviewed on my channel, so if you want to check that out, you can. I'll probably put a title card above here somewhere. Speaking of, for those who are brand new to the channel and this is the very first video you're watching, this is definitely not my first ranking video, or a giant one at that. This is a consecutive third time I've done a major ranking on a subject like this. It's one of the many things I do on this channel. Back in October, I ranked all 111 Marvel and DC films from worst to best, and although it's slightly obsolete now because of Wonder Woman 84 and the Snyder Cut being released, it's still a giant 3-hour video, and it covers everything from Adam West's Batman movie from 1966 to New Mutants. And back in the years, I ranked every single Pixar and DreamWorks movie. That's still up to date as of time of recording, so if you end up enjoying this video, I recommend you check those out as well. But enough with the shameless plugging. Let's get into possibly the worst batch of movies I've ever had to rank. Ranking all 52 video game movies from the worst to the best. Let's pop in some chords and get this game started, because this shit's gonna be rough. Coming in last place, number 52, Postal. One of many films covered by the one and only Uwe Boll. He's a German filmmaker that back in the early 2000s bought a lot of the rights to a lot of the video game movies they would end up doing, and a lot of them, especially this one, are considered not only to be some of the worst video game movies ever made, which is saying a lot, but also just some of the worst films ever made. Not to mention the guy has a notorious history of, boxing critics that didn't like his movies. He would get tax schemes where he would, take money from the film's budget and just keep it on his own. He would berate cast members constantly, and there's just so much more that I just recommend you just look the guy up just to see how much crazy stuff he's been into. But this film just, I don't even know where to start with this one. I really don't know where to start with this one. This movie sucks. Let's get into this one. Although I will say it's probably more entertaining and more memorable than some of the films above it that he's directed, this film is the only film on this list I will truly say it's an anti-movie. It's a new term that I've come up with where it's basically where, a movie's meant to entertain you. We got drama, biopics, comedies, action films, horror movies. There's a lot of different types of entertainment. You can be scared, you can be laughing, you can be excited, you can be adrenalized. There's a lot of different things that a movie can do. This film doesn't do anything of that. This movie is trying to piss you off from the get-go to the very end. This movie is meant to be a comedy, but at the end of the day, it's just trying to piss you off. Even on the poster and the trailers, it says disturbing, offensive, stupid, or whatever the hell it says. This movie's just trying to piss you off. Now, if you don't know what I'm talking about, the games that this movie's based on do have a really dark sense of humor and do a lot of screwed up things that, gained a lot of controversy back in the late 90s, early 2000s, and this movie tries to replicate that, but this film is so gross and so mean-spirited, and it doesn't even do a good job at trying to offend you. Like, the opening scene of the film is about two Muslim guys flying a plane, and they're debating about, how many versions they will get from Allah, and they're calling up Osama bin Laden because this was made, back in, 2008, where, the political high tension of, H.W. Bush and 9/11 was still fresh in a lot of people's minds, and that political climate, that's kind of the driving force of this movie, trying to get all the jokes out of, which I'll get into later. And then it ends up with these two guys after they realize they won't get any versions from Osama bin Laden, decide to turn the plane around, and then the passengers break in, and they try to, stop the plane only to cause the plane to crash into the Twin Towers. If you like that type of humor, here's 90 minutes of it. This film sucks. It's like, I can't even, okay. Let me try to comprehend this once at a time. Firstly, there's not one character in this movie that's likable whatsoever. We get Scott Fargus from The Christmas Story in here, who's the title role as Postal Dude. He basically just plays an average guy who doesn't really stand out much in society, and then he just gets thrown into this situation where you don't understand where he's going and you don't understand what's going on. He's a complete blank slate of a protagonist, and then this wild plot unfolds, if you can even call it a plot, where just a bunch of random shit just happens, where you have this cult by this main character's uncle, who basically prophesizes the end of the world and all this stuff. And then our main character has to run away from stuff because he's being framed for things, and there's tax fraud, and there's a fat wife that he has that everybody in town has sex with, and then she gets blown up at the very end. And then there's Uwe Boll in the cameo, who runs a Nazi-themed Disneyland. And then J.K. Simmons appears talking about the moon landing being fake and W. Bush and Bin Laden working together. The film's not funny. That's the biggest issue. This film tries to be funny and tries to be so offensive, and it doesn't work because this film is stale as hell. This film's trying to bank on you being offended by 9/11 and Bush and Bin Laden, which barely even revolves around this plot. The film constantly cuts away from the plot and distracts you to try to get these gags going with H.W. Bush and Bin Laden, where they're, secretly calling each other at the very end when, all these nukes go off. They're, holding hands together, running around the daisies and stuff, and you're like, what's going on? And the problem is that a lot of these jokes, these are stuff that you would hear middle schoolers say. And because it's been 13, 14 years since this movie dropped, the political climate is not the same as it used to be. This guy's trying to offend you and it doesn't work because the humor is just so stale at this point. Congrats, you made a 9/11 joke, good for you. Team America did this shit way funnier back in 2003? The movie's not funny, none of the acting's good whatsoever. The quality of the movie, the actual camera quality, the color grading, all of it looks like shit. The film just annoyed me throughout the entire runtime. All it did was just make me check the time every 5 minutes or so, just waiting for this movie to be over. And it was only 90 minutes long, and it felt like I was watching the entire Godfather trilogy. And not as in terms of quality, as in terms of the fucking length. I can watch all three of the extended editions of Lord of the Rings, and they go by faster than this movie does. The only thing that this movie could potentially be funny if you were drunk with a group of friends and you could laugh at it, maybe. But again, this movie was just so annoying that I just could not stand it. It doesn't do anything right. It's not funny, and when a comedy's not funny, it fails. It doesn't matter if you have an all-star cast and an all-star director and an all-star crew. If the movie's not funny, it doesn't work. And then it tries to offend you, and the jokes are so stale at this point that nobody cares. And when you remove those two things, there's nothing underneath the surface. There's nothing there. There's nothing to grab onto and actually enjoy. It's just crap for the sake of crap, and that's all it is. And I cannot see anybody past my generation watching this movie and actually getting something out of it. Yeah, you want to see a little guy be molested by 1,000 monkeys? Here's your movie for you, but other than that, this movie just sucks. I don't like it whatsoever. This movie's bad. This movie's bad. Coming in at number 51 is going to be In the Name of the King 3, The Last Mission. I hope it's The Last Mission. Please don't let there be another one of these movies. Please, God. So this is currently the last video game movie that this guy, Uwe Boll, has ever directed. And this came out in 2014, so hopefully this is the last one. But this movie, I don't even know where to start with this one. So let's just get the basics out of the way. This movie is incredibly cheap. This movie is filmed in Bulgaria. This movie has absolutely no actors that you recognize beyond Dominic Purcell, who is an actor that I only recognize from Blade Trinity as the modern version of Dracula, who is terrible in that movie, but honestly compared to this film, I'd rather take a Drake standalone movie compared to just the stone cold face, which honestly, I understand kind of working with Uwe Boll, and he did 3 or 4 films with him, and you can tell that he just wants to put a gun in his mouth every single time you see him on screen. His dialogue is monotone, he has the same face to everything, even when he sees a dragon running around Bulgaria or wherever the fuck, he has the same cold stone expression because he just does not care what he's doing, and the rest of the acting is just bad. The movie completely copies the plot from In the Name of the King 2 about this guy just getting thrown into a different time period for no reason. A portal just appears, which the effects in this film, this movie cost $3.5 million. It does not show it. I have legit seen better effects on After Effects that I've seen my high school peers used for skits that we've done, and there's no excuse for aged effects. This movie came out 7 years ago. But beyond that, this movie is incredibly dull. This movie is meant to be an action film, it's meant to be a period piece, and it fails at both. As being a period piece, Uwe Boll thinks that the medieval times is just filming in some guy's backyard in Bulgaria in the woods and just having some people wearing some armor and some swords, and that's about it. That's all you get. Like, the first film actually had a budget and actually named actors, which we'll get to later on in this list, but the set design is absolutely terrible because they're literally just walking around trees the entire time. Dominic Purcell is just wearing his fucking t-shirt and jeans the entire time. He doesn't even wear armor. Even though there's posters of him wearing armor, the bad guy in this movie is absolutely forgettable. The action sucks. Like, the action is terrible in this movie. It's literally just people swinging swords around, kicking each other, and you could tell that there was no choreography planned. They're just like, yeah, just fucking swing swords. This movie has no choreography, along with the fact that Uwe Boll decides to shake the camera so hard that you can barely see what's going on. And the final fight, the climax between our bad guy and Dominic Purcell, is just them fighting behind a brick wall in some fucking back lot of a forest. And he just gets an upper hand, just stabs him in the gut, and he dies. That's the big fight. And then we get this dragon who just runs around Bulgaria, and Dominic Purcell just has to run around these streets that has nobody in them, and he just manages to get away. The dialogue is terrible, the acting is bad, plot holes make no sense, the contrivances are out the window. There's character setups, and then there's just scenes that just don't make any sense, like the opening scene where, like, Dominic Purcell, like, shoots, like, these guys in the hotel because he's an assassin, and then he just makes himself a cup of, like, coffee and just leaves fingerprints all over the place. Like, what? And it just never gets brought up again why he killed the person in the hotel. There's absolutely no music. There's absolutely no score. The writing is just what you expect for a bargain sequel to a franchise that nobody even cared about. And you can tell there was no effort put in this movie. Like, the only reason why Uwe Boll made this movie is so he can get funds to make another movie with Dominic Purcell called Assault on Wall Street, in which he wanted to take down Wall Street. He wanted to expose the truth about Wall Street's hiding or some shit. He only made this film so he could try to take down Wall Street. Oh my god. I'm done talking about this movie. Let's just get into the next one. Number 50. Another Uwe Boll movie, Blood Rain: The Third Reich. This series has never been good like the other ones I've talked about previously, and this one was the last one that he made in his Blood Rain trilogy. And considering the fact it's a later Uwe Boll movie, you can tell that all of his funds they had for his previous movies went away. This movie cost like, what, $2 million, and he probably shoved most of that away for himself. You can tell that he just got most of the people that he already worked with in previous movies, and they do not care to act whatsoever. You get Clint Howard in this movie, who does a terrible, terrible German accent, and is so annoying in the movie. It's a generic Nazi subplot where they gotta do super soldier stuff, and Blood Rain has to stop them, and generic action scenes that have absolutely no fluidity or any sort of good editing to them. They're just choppy, sloppily put together. The color grading's terrible, the writing is just bare minimum, what do you expect? They try to make Blood Rain badass, but honestly you don't know anything about her character, even from the previous two movies. And a big issue with Uwe Boll's sequels is that he doesn't really connect the previous movies together, even though he returns to direct every single one of them. So there's no connective tissue between this and the first two movies. She teams up with the one guy from Freddy vs. Jason to stop these Nazis, and it's just bare minimum. This movie's like 80 minutes long. There's absolutely no fat to it. Like, there's absolutely no fat to the story whatsoever. It's bare bones. I mean, the bones are metastasizing. There's nothing to the script. There's nothing to these actors. Nobody in this movie actually tries to do anything with it. It's just terrible. There are a couple of cool things, like there's this one scene towards the end where Blood Rain gets like a big boulder and just smashes their bad guy's head in, and you can see a bunch of blood spraying everywhere. Kind of cool kill. That's about it. I like the snowy setting of it. It makes the film actually kind of look professional. That's about it. This movie sucks. This movie's bad. Let's get to the next one. Number 49, Alone in the Dark 2. A sequel to an Uwe Boll movie that somehow did worse without Uwe Boll. How do you do that? Let's start with the big negative here. This movie is not a sequel to the first film. It's one of those non-sequels that basically does have no connective tissue to the first film, but they just slap the name on it just so they can get extra DVD sales. That's one of these sequels. You can feel the cheapness on the production because this film only takes place in one house. I mean, it only takes place in one house. Even though there's like 10 characters in the movie present. There's this magical dagger MacGuffin storyline that, you know, it's just the bare minimum plot thread that this movie tries to tie together. The acting, despite the fact that there's multiple big named actors in this movie, they're the type of actors that will do anything for a paycheck. You get Lance Henriksen in here, you get Bill Moseley, you get Danny Trejo, who literally has no establishing character. Like, there's a scene in the basement where the generator in this house goes off, and then like they have this attack in the basement, and you just see Danny Trejo there with a gun. There's no previous establishing you saw this character. He doesn't get, you know, any sort of introduction in the previous movie, and it's like 45 minutes into this hour and a half movie, and you just see him like he just walked into the set just because he wanted to be in the movie for like 5 seconds to get like a free Subway sandwich. That's about it. The acting is bad. The storyline is bad. You get like Rick Yoon, who's trying to be the same character that Christian Slater was in the previous movie, and you don't feel that whatsoever. The effects are terrible, and I mean really bad. Not as bad as I would say in The King 3. The action is lackluster, the storyline is bad. The film breaks its own rules in terms of like what people can and can't do. The main girl of the movie that somehow falls in love with our main character halfway through this like, demon invasion storyline. They have absolutely no chemistry, but they fall in love because the script says so. And then she becomes possessed, and then literally the ending of the movie, how she gets defeated, is that she's this all-powerful demon that has survived centuries of attacks, gets apple bobbed. Like, I mean, like, she gets pulled underwater in this barrel, like she's bobbing for apples multiple times, and then just dies. Meanwhile, Les Henderson gets shot twice in the kneecap and in like the side of the face, and then he's completely fine unscathed. He's able to walk completely fine at the very end of the movie, and you're like, what the hell is going on? Like, who got punked? Who legit was like, we're gonna make a sequel on the cheap over the weekend? Why don't we just like get whoever we can off Rob Zombie's Halloween, like Bill Moseley or Danny Trejo, throw a bunch of people together, slap the name Alone in the Dark 2 on it, and that's all you get. This movie's nothing like the games. This movie's nothing like the first film, which in and of itself is not a good movie, but this film is bare bones. This movie sucks. This movie's nothing. It's more competently put together than the previous 3 movies on this list I mentioned previously, but like, this movie, like, what the hell? Even the posters knock off of the first movie. Like, I'm done with this movie. Let's get into the next one. Number 48, House of the Dead. Now, this is the infamous Uwe Boll movie. This is probably the one that most people know about, and, it's kind of a staple of why video game movies are so trash. Like, when people talk about video game movies, this is kind of like the poster boy of, like, what not to do with a video game movie, and this movie still is one of the worst ones I've ever seen. It's entertainingly bad. Like, at least there's stuff that I remember more about it. Like, I struggle to remember most of the stuff about the previous movies on this list. But this one, there are quite a bit of things I do remember. It's not good things, like how the fact that there's like this 20-minute action sequence and the film constantly cuts between the action and just random shots of the video game for no reason. There's no correlation. And like most other video game movies, this movie has nothing to do with that. This movie's nothing like that other than we gotta shoot zombies. The film has a terrible techno soundtrack. The characters are nothing. The script is barely thrown together, and it tries to be funny. And it's not funny. And it's a horror comedy. It's terrible. The zombies, they're not really anything to write home about. They're just generic zombies. And mind you, this isn't a time where 28 Days Later really just revived the zombie genre and made zombies actually scary for once, in my opinion. And this film doesn't make them scary whatsoever. It's a cheesy, terrible, wannabe blockbuster movie-ish. This movie's a terrible wannabe horror comedy that has absolutely nothing to it. It's not entertaining other than you want a good laugh at it with your friends. The movie's outdated in every single way. The editing is some of the worst I've seen in any big budget movie. The directing is terrible, the writing is exactly the same. That's about it. This movie's still terrible. Number 47. Let's get away from Uwe Boll. Let's talk about Resident Evil: The Final Chapter. For an already bad movie franchise of a great video game series, this one definitely goes out on a down note. Now, my experience with Resident Evil isn't a whole lot. I played some of the remake on GameCube, and I played some of Biohazard, but nothing that would say call me a Resident Evil fan. And even after the second film, like, the films never even try to be like the games anymore, and this film is just a generic apocalypse zombie film. This film is by far the worst of them all. I remember seeing this back when it came out, and my god, is the editing. I talked about House of the Dead and how terrible the editing that was. This film might even be worse as in terms of the editing. Like, my god. Like, the way the clips are spliced together is like a millisecond. Like, you can barely see the action on the screen. You can tell that like none of the actors are doing their own stunts. The CGI is terrible. Like, it's just a bunch of just X's on the screen. A bunch of zombies that are just like crowds and hordes of stuff that just looks like a PS2 game. Like, the color grading and the shot composition and the cinematography is just dreck. It's just browns and grays and blacks and just, it looks ugly. As a final chapter to this franchise, the film actually has a lot of loose ends and even ends on a fucking cliffhanger. Like, why? Like, the big makeup that these characters are going after is like this vaccine to the T virus, the main, virus that causes pandemic in the first place. And the Red Queen, this little girl, is ordering Alice, our main character, to get this or else all the remaining humans on Earth will die within 24 hours. And you have no idea, like, what's gonna kill them, the virus, the zombies, and there's no sort of tension within the film whatsoever. Because you honestly can't understand what's going on. The film's side characters are basically forgettable. The only reason why you remember them is basically because of the actors, like Ruby Rose is one of them. Ali Lara returns from one of the previous movies. We get Wesker, who's basically like, the cyborg guy who comes back to be another villain, and you're just like, why are you doing the things that you're doing? The film repeats so many other storylines from previous movies. The film as a final chapter does nothing to solve a lot of these questions that we've had answers to for years. The action is absolute dreck because all of it's filmed on the green screen, you can tell. I just did not care about this movie. This movie is just so infuriating because it was just so long and so overdrawn and trying to be such this big final chapter, and it failed at trying to give you a satisfying conclusion or even just be a dumb fun zombie movie. I just did not like this film along with a lot of the other Resident Evil films we'll talk about later on in this list, and I just hope that the reboot to this franchise coming out later this year is at least somewhat better than these Paul W.S. Anderson movies and actually maybe like the games for once. We'll see what happens. Number 46, Super Mario Brothers, the very first video game movie to ever hit the silver screen, and is still one of the worst video game movies ever made. This is a classic textbook definition of what not to do with a video game property, but it is funny. It is so bad that it is good in my opinion. This film is terrible on all accounts. The acting is dreck. Bob Hoskins and was it John Leguizamo as Mario and Luigi, or I'm sorry, Mario and Luigi Mario.
Okay, how many Marios are there between the two of you?
It's three. It's Mario and Luigi Mario.
Are terrible in the best ways possible. Dennis Hopper as King Koopa. Oh my god. You get Daisy in this movie whose father's like this geyser or something like that. Like, it's one of the strangest things I've ever seen in any movie. The designs of the Koopas and all these classic Mario characters that we've seen for decades look like crap. The action scenes are bad. The score is bad. The directing is dreck. The comedy's not funny. It's aged poorly. Some of the one-liners are some of the worst I've seen in any movie, but in the best way. This film is so bad, and it's just like, who actually greenlit this movie? Like, who actually saw the dailies while this film was being filmed and was like, you know what? This is competent enough that we can put this in theaters for a wide release. This film should have never been made. This film should have never been in live action, or at least not in 1993. And it just shows that some video game movies just do not translate well into live action. It is bad, but my god, is this film hilarious. Number 45 is going to be Blood Rain 2 Deliverance. Back to Uwe Boll. So this one is slightly better than the Third Reich, but I mean, not by much. This film is a significant downgrade to the first film, which wasn't even a good film to begin with. Where the film was trying to emulate a lot more serious tones about, this epic 1800s setting in the castle in this mythic gothic era. And getting a bunch of actual named actors that we'll talk about later on this list. And you get from that, and you go to the Wild West. This movie literally takes place in the Wild West, which is literally just a soundstage. And you have Billy the Kid, played by Zach Penn, from Postal. Scott Fargus, once again, he's one of the many actors that just reappear in a bunch of these Uwe Boll movies, where he plays Billy the Kid eating children, and, Blood Rain has to stop him. And then you also have the side characters like the sheriff of the town. You also have this reporter from Chicago who has this hero arc where he's like, oh, I'm a wimp at first, but then I'm gonna be the hero at the very end, and it's just terrible. The comedy doesn't work. The writing is dreck. The acting is terrible. The sets are just made of plaster. The action is lackluster. The villains aren't even well established in the movie. And you can tell this is a foreigner trying to tackle an American concept, and you can tell, like, the Wild West thing just doesn't jive as well as the settings of the first one, or even the third film. Because there's so many inaccuracies about Billy the Kid and all this, like, random stuff being thrown into the mix. The music is bad. There's so many rules about, like, how Blood Rain needs to, like, suck. Like, she's basically Blade. She's basically Blade, where she's a daywalker and she needs, like, blood from humans to sustain her, health and stuff, and sustain her morality and keep her at bay. And that rule just kind of goes out the window. None of the side characters are involving whatsoever. The film's barely memorable, and it's not good. I did not like this movie. I'm never going to watch it again. Coming in, number 44 is going to be another Uwe Boll sequel, In the Name of the King 2. Two Worlds. Again, similar to Blood Rain 2, it's a massive scale down from the first film, where basically you get Dolph Lundgren, who's like this, ex-military karate teacher who, like, in The Name of the King 3, which this film was very much a catalyst for that movie, where a porter randomly shows up and he just gets sucked back into medieval times, and then he just comes across this, like, king and his, kingdom and stuff, and then he has to, do all this, like, trials and tribulations because he's the chosen one or whatever, and it's just generic medieval stuff. It's fantasy stuff that I don't really care about. You can tell that the film's just on the cheap, that they just film in the woods, and they rent a couple cabins out, basically. Dolph Lundgren, he's not a leading man. He's way better as a side role, or someone like Drago, where it's simple, but he can play it well. He's not a leading man. Like, I did not like his version of The Punisher, for example. And he's just not one of those actors that has that gravitas. You can tell this is just a paycheck movie, because similar to Dominic Purcell, he does not want to be there in every single scene, you can tell. The villain is terrible, he's not thrown in whatsoever. The romance is very forced and very obvious, and just no chemistry between the actors. The action, again, it's just a bunch of people just swinging around swords, and you can tell these people have never, learned any sort of swordsmanship in their life, so it's just people just swinging around and kicking, and it's just, the camera just a jitter away, like there's actually something happening for once, apparently. The film just feels so contained and claustrophobic. Like, even the final battle takes place between Dolph Lundgren and the king in his little house, and and they're literally just like throwing pots and pans at each other, and you can feel the budget just being restrained by every single scene. It's just a non-sequel that barely connects to the first film. There's no mention of Jason Statham or if he's an ancestor or somebody. It's just a generic medieval movie that just slaps In the Name of the King 2 on it because apparently people know who this franchise is. Like, what? It's just a bad movie in all accounts, and it's just not fun. It's tolerable enough, like the first few minutes are okay, I guess. Like, I'm just pissed I had to pay $4 to watch this and In the Name of the King 3. Like, I could have gotten like 12 or 16 packs of ramen noodle or cup of noodle and just fed it to a homeless family, but no, I spent on 2 shitty Uwe Boll movies, and now him and Jeff Bezos took my money on Amazon Prime. Thank you so much. I wasted my time. Number 43 is going to be Tekken 2, Kazuya's Revenge. Now, let me paint the scene for you. I had no idea what this film is going in. I didn't watch a trailer or a plot synopsis or anything like that. Now, in the first film, the main villain was Kazuya. You know, he gets defeated at the end of the first film, and given by the subtitle, I would expect, okay, it's going to be a continuation of the first film where he would get back our main characters for winning a tournament, right? Nope, it's a prequel, despite the fact that's a number on it, which I hate whenever sequels do that. Like in City Chapter 3, which is a way better film than this. But still, this is a generic prequel, which is one of the most boring films of this entire list. Nothing happens in this movie. Our main character Kazuya is just a blank slate that we have absolutely nothing about. He's an amnesiac, but it's just the generic action story like Jason Bourne that we've seen, where it's like, oh, the whole story is about me unraveling my past, and it's just, the film doesn't surprise you at any single turn. The romance between our main 2 leads is just dull, no chemistry there. The villain is just bland. There's so many weird things that happen in this movie, like, our main character gets a bomb put on his chest, and our main lead girl, who's a nurse, somehow managed to get the bomb defused from his chest. The action when it's there is just not good, and it takes like 45 minutes to get to the action scenes in a film that's based off a fighting game that's not good whatsoever. It's just a bad movie, no more, no less. Number 42 is going to be Silent Hill Revelation, another bad video game sequel. Surprise! This film could have had potential to be good. Like, the first film we'll get to it way later on this list is actually somewhat decent. It has enough of a story where you can actually build upon a sequel with it. I do like the concept of, you know, the main little girl, Raha Mitchell, from the first film being, you know, a high school student and having to be drawn back to Silent Hill to save her dad, having to encounter all that past trauma and such. Decent concept, executed in a terrible way. There's some legit good imagery in the movie. Like, I do like Pyramid Head in the movie. I think he was kind of the main selling point of the film on the posters and trailers and such. Really good design, accurate to the games. I like the look of Silent Hill. I actually do like that. Whenever we get practical effects in this film, it actually looks pretty good, but it's all tainted with just terrible CGI, just plaster and like melting metal and stuff, and it just looks bad. The chemistry between our main character and Kit Harington is bad. The main lead in this movie is meant to be like a high school student, like a junior or a senior or something like that, and she looks 26, and it's not convincing for a second. None of the acting is good whatsoever. We get Malcolm McDowell in this really weird get-up that makes no sense. And we get Sean Bean, who barely does anything in the film. The film tries to be scary by just throwing you jump scares in your face, and it's not scary whatsoever. The CGI is terrible. The film's not really investing, nor does it really expand upon the lore of the Silent Hill universe that much either. The 3 that was definitely forced into this movie are barely implemented and just really just stick out like a sore thumb nowadays, like Ghost Rider Spirit of Vengeance, or any of these things where 3 was meant to be this big thing and then it just fizzled out. It's just a really shitty sequel, nothing more, nothing less. Number 41 is going to be Resident Evil Retribution. Another really bad Resident Evil sequel. But this time we got Michelle Rodriguez returning from the first film, and she's no better than she was back in 2002. I barely remember this movie. This movie just, it definitely falls into the background of a lot of the other Resident Evil movies. You get Wesker, who tries to kill owls multiple times, and just it fails. The action scenes are nothing, you know, to behold about. And there's actually a really cool final shot of like the zombie crowd hoarding Washington DC and the White House, and you see like dragons appear out of the sky, and it's just like a really cool final image. And like most of the other Resident Evil movies, they end on a really cool cliffhanger, and then they just do not follow it up on the next movie. And it just puts a bad taste in your mouth. This movie is just so forgettable and just so by the wayside that it's not even worth talking about. Number 40, Max Payne. This movie gave me a lot of pain. This movie sucks. Now, this was the first time watching this list, so I heard how bad it was beforehand, but I did not realize how bad this movie was. This movie actually had the potential to be good. That's why it's so frustrating, because the games themselves are actually kind of grounded, you know what I'm saying? They have fantastical elements to them, sure, but they're not like this movie tries to be like. It's not something like Super Mario Brothers where it's like you cannot translate that to the screen, you know? It's a cool detective story and a murder mystery story all kind of wrapped up into one, and this movie could have actually used it, but it ends up just being a really poor man's Sin City. And in the worst way possible. Like, oh my god. The acting is terrible. None of the characters are likable whatsoever. They're all just dull and lifeless and just stale. You get good actors like Mark Wahlberg and Mila Kunis, and Ludacris isn't here some reason as a detective. Donald Logue comes here for 5 minutes and then he dies abruptly. The film's just cold and isolated and just It's not fun whatsoever. The writing is bad. And what really tanks this film is the plot. The plot of this one was just dreck. The plot makes no sense. It tries to be this murder mystery at first about, Max trying to avenge his family from being killed by druggies and, tracking them down. And then it turns to these people being drugged and they see hallucinations of like multiple demons and from hell and such. And you're like, what? Why are there dragons appearing out of the sky? This is a Max Payne movie, right? And it has one of the worst scenes I've seen in any video game movie where like Mark Wahlberg, he gets thrown into a lake and it's like ice cold because it's like it's set in the winter. And then he just gets out and he just starts screaming and you're like, what the hell? This came out the same year as The Happening, too. 2008 was a bad time for Mark Wahlberg. Not to mention the special effects really are outdated. This movie is just bad. It's not well put together. There are some good laughs to be had in it, like I said, like with Mark Wahlberg screaming and it has this really weird like reverb to it. Other than that, this film just blows. Number 39 is going to be Mortal Kombat Annihilation. Now, a lot of people will be surprised how high this film is on this list, but after seeing so many bad, and I mean bad films we've talked about previously, seeing something that is just entertainingly bad is a lot more than just seeing something that is just boring and dull and lifeless and just so annoying. I've talked about multitude of the films previously. Like, here's the thing, this movie's bad. I'm not gonna argue that. I'm not gonna try to rebuttal it and say it's like some hidden masterpiece. It's a bad movie. But it's funny. It actually feels like a video game movie. It feels like Mortal Kombat. It does not feel like a generic medieval movie or generic action film like I've talked about previously. It actually feels like a video game movie. Now, there's an excuse for this film being bad, but at least it fits. There's actual actors that I remember from this film, like Dexter's father plays Raiden in a really bad wig and he doesn't care. But hey, at least he's there. Liu Kang and Katana returning from the previous movie. Hey, at least they're there. There's some hilariously Shyamalan bad dialogue in here.
Mother, you're alive. Too bad you will die.
But for all intents and purposes, I had a blast with this movie, or how bad it was. It's not well put together. It completely botches the cliffhanger of the first Mortal Kombat movie in favor of just a really terrible villain and a really weird mask. All the recastings of the characters from the first film are inferior in every single way, especially Johnny Cage, who just gets unceremoniously just neck broken in the first 5 minutes. Great way to start the movie. The action is poorly shot together and edited together. Costume design is terrible. Score is bad. Directing is bad. Writing is bad. It's not a good film, but you know what? It is nowhere near the worst of all time list. Especially considering this list, it is nowhere near as bad. I would easily rewatch this in any other film below it on the list because I can at least laugh at it and actually has a good pace to it. It's not like, doesn't run for hours like Postal does, but it's still not a good sequel. Speaking of Annihilation, number 38, Doom Annihilation, a sequel that is not even a sequel. Who made this? Who greenlit this decision? Like, this is like Bulletproof 2 or some shit. It actually came up by the same company, Universal 440, who distributed that movie. This movie is generic as hell. This is one of the most generic films on this entire list. You can feel the cheapness on set. There's nothing to it. It's not a Doom movie whatsoever. It's just a generic sci-fi alien invasion movie with hints of Doom. There's a couple of first-person sequences. There's a couple of costumes that look like the aliens from Doom, which actually kind of look halfway decent for a cosplay. It goes by fairly quick. It's, you can easily turn it on and just put it on the background, and that's what this film's best placed in. It's not horrendously awful. It's not like the first Doom movie was that good, but still, it's like, who asked for another Doom movie that was just on this level of quality where it was just nothing like the game, generic characters, generic action, generic scares. Nothing about this film is memorable whatsoever. I cannot tell you a single character's name or barely any scenes or barely any moments that just stick out. This film is just nothing. That's all it is. Number 37 is going to be Assassin's Creed. Man, this was a disappointment. This could have been actually something really good. You get Michael Fassbender, who strangely, he either does great roles or just chooses crap. Like, this came out the same year as X-Men Apocalypse, which I didn't like. He did Dark Phoenix later on, which just wasn't good. This was like kind of a bad time for him as an actor. Where it's just like, did he just do a paycheck movie? Now, I'm not a massive Assassin's Creed fan by any means, but I mean, it's a game that could actually translate well into live action with the right script and the right director, but this one was so bland. This one was so dull. There are some good costume design. I do like the look of Michael Fassbender as the main character and is like, in the Assassin's Creed getup that we all know from the games. There's a good production design. There's some good action bits here and there, but for all intents and purposes, it's just a generic MacGuffin storyline by trying to get this apple and no, not fruit. Barely any sort of, character development whatsoever. Action set pieces that really don't stick with you whatsoever after the credits roll. And like a couple of the previous movies, it's just there to be thrown in the background just while you're editing a video, and that's about the best best you can get from this film. It's nothing more, nothing less. And it's just frustrating how much this film actually had as in terms of resources for behind the camera and in front of the camera that just ended up being as forgettable as it is. Number 36, back to Bull with Alone in the Dark. You actually get named actors in here. You get Christian Slater, who was definitely in a dark time in his career when he was doing films like Hollow Man 2, Tara Reid from the American Pie movies, you get Stephen Dorff from Blade, and you throw them together and it's just a generic monster movie. Like these vampire creature designs, I don't even really remember them that much. Dialogue is bad, characters non-existent, acting not that good. I mean, Christian Slater's fine, but I mean, he's one of those actors that, you know, he's charismatic enough to where he can just phone it in, just be better than 90% of the actors in the movie. Romance, nothing there. Action, lackluster. Scares, what scares? But I will say, Ashley does look professional. Ashley does look pretty good for the time. Ashley looks like Uwe Boll spent the money on the actual movie and didn't just like pocketed it for himself for once. And for the most part, it's tolerable. I can watch it easily in the background. The film doesn't have any 9/11 jokes. It doesn't try to kill kids. It ends up just being a generic monster movie, which, although it's still bad, it's not as bad as the previous films. Number 35 is going to be Street Fighter: The Legend of Chun-Li. A sequel? Maybe, I don't know. It's kind of weird. A film that honestly could have been better than a 90s Street Fighter movie. You know, you're adapting it to modern day. You actually do get good actors like Michael Clark Duncan in here, Neil McDonough, who, although he's very much a guy that kind of takes a paycheck, he does good in roles where he's required in. Especially the, you know, Academy Award-winning film Paul Blart Mall Cop 2. You know, you get named actors in here. You get, you know, the actor who played Liu Kang in the 90s Mortal Kombat films here. And you could have been something special, but honestly, this one was just so generic and dull. It's just of the time. It feels like a generic late 2000s action film. It belongs in the streets like Jumper or, you know, Faster, like those Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson early action films. Nothing special. Fights, eh. Acting from, you know, the actual named actors is actually decent. You know, the plot's generic, you know, hero's journey, gotta find myself, who I am. Okay, fine, whatever. It has a fast enough pace. It goes by quickly. Again, it's not something you just throw on in the background and you just forget about it. It's nothing there. It's nothing special. It's nothing as goofy as a 90s Street Fighter film and nothing is memorable. And for that, it just makes it worse and less rewatchable in my opinion. Coming in number 34 is to be Resident Evil Afterlife. Again, it's just another very generic, forgettable installment in this franchise. Ali Lauder appears in this one and she's not really much of a standout here. This kind of lost some of the artistic flair of the previous three movies, where those some of the very stylistic locations and such. This one just felt so bleak and just damp and just the color grading and the saturation of everything that looked around it was just so CGI heavy and just so generic apocalypse looking that there's just not much that sticks with me on this one. I don't think it's offensively bad, it's just very generic action stuff. I really can't tell you much else about it. I mean, like, Wesker, I guess, is the villain. They have like a big generic final fight. The chemistry between their main actors isn't really much to write home about. The most memorable action set piece is probably like the scene where, you know, Mil Jovovich has like land a helicopter and, you know, almost falls off a building. That's probably just the most memorable scene in the movie for me. Or in that, I don't know. It's just dull. Number 33 is going to be Blood Rain, the first of a very unfortunate series. Now this one's definitely a lot better than the sequels would end up being, because they actually had stars and actual budget to this one. Although this film, you can't really tell how much money they really had beyond getting Ben Kingsley and a couple other known actors in this one, and getting the TX for Terminator 3 to play Blood Rain herself. You know, the fantasy elements of this one felt a lot more fitting of the character than the Wild West setting in the second film, or, you know, World War II in the third film. It felt right for the character. The action is not much to write home about, but there are a few action shots that are well done. Acting somewhat tolerable for the most part, but you can tell a lot of the actors just didn't really want to be there. The lighting in this film is quite bad. It has the AVP Requiem issue of they only could afford like 2 lights on the set. The romance, that's not really much beyond, you know, a very memorable sex scene at a jail cell. That's probably like the most memorable scene in the entire movie. The storyline, not much. I mean, we're basically established that Blood Rain is basically just, you know, a female Blade. And that's an issue because when you have an invisible character, you know, a lot of that tension is taken out of the storyline and a lot of the ways taken out of the action set pieces. Because I'm really scared that our main hero has any sort of weakness, and that's the issue when you walk into an action film. You want to feel tension, at least in my opinion, and you just don't really get much here. I don't know, it's not offensively about Uwe Boll movie, it's just not a good one, which is a dime a dozen. Number 32 is going to be Double Dragon. I believe this is the second video game movie that came out after Super Mario Bros. A year later, or I think the third one after Street Fighter. I don't know, either or. This is one of the very early video game movies that came out in the very, you know, early 90s, and you can feel that. This is really one that is a staple of the early 90s. It hasn't really aged that well since. This is one of the many fighting video game movies out there, and this one really doesn't do much to stand out from the pack beyond the time period. You get Robert Patrick in here, who was fun to see, and his really weird, like, blonde getup. The main budget between our main two brothers is fine. I mean, I thought Mark Dacascos was quite decent in the film. It has some 90s cheese that doesn't make it more entertaining in my opinion. But once again, like most of these video game movies, it's all about a MacGuffin storyline where we get gotta get these 2 hats with a necklace so we can put them together and, get these fancy little costumes. The whole futuristic setting of it was 2007, we're all gonna be like under militaristic law, like it's Predator 2 or something like that. The film's fight scenes aren't really that memorable, and the film as a whole just doesn't really have a lot of standout moments that would like really, make me want to rewatch this film. I haven't seen this film in quite a while. And over the film is just one that, it's not a very memorable movie, not one that I would, want to go back and rewatch a whole lot. It's a bad movie, but you know what? It does have some of that flavor to it that a lot of these video game movies really don't have. Number 31 is Far Cry. This was the last Info movie I watched before getting ready for this video, and I do have a little bit of leeway to be on this list because, watching this last one, knowing that I wouldn't have to watch another video game movie ever again by him, hopefully. We'll see what happens if he comes back. But knowing this was the last one I had to watch, and actually I heard this was one of the better ones that he made, I was optimistic, and you know what? It met my expectations. It's not a good movie. I assume it's not like the games. I mean, I haven't played them. I mean, there's one starring Nacho, and now there's one upcoming starring Gustavo Fring. What more could I want? But for this film's not really offensive in any sort of way for the most part. It's just it tries to be an action comedy, and for what it is, the action, although it's not that good, it's nowhere near as bad as something like House of the Dead, and not like constantly cutting to Far Cry footage. The plot's quite messy, and there's just a lot of random stuff that just happens for reasons like, it's just about this like ex-hitman or ex-soldier who's just, doing boat rides in Germany, and then all of a sudden there's like this zombie outbreak or like this experiment that goes wrong, and now he has to team up with another woman, and they have to take care of the situation together. And I think there's another guy who's like an employee for the bad guy in the movie that gets thrown into the mix, and he's pretty much the comic relief of the movie. He's been in other Movable movies. I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but he is just absolutely terrible in this movie. He is the reason why this film is as low as it is on this list. It probably would have been a lot better. I just think it might actually be somewhat decent if he wasn't in the movie, but I don't even blame him. I just think it's Uwe Boll's writing that was just absolutely terrible. Like, there's a scene where like him and the main character Till Schweiker are tied up in this like little facility, and he's just trying to crack jokes. Like, the bad guy walks in, he's like, I don't know this guy, can you please let me free? Like, he's doing the obvious jokes we've seen before of, like, trying to get out of the situation, and, Till Schweiker gets the key, and then he's like, oh, shimmy up, like, just like dance class, and all this stupid stuff. And he has like this little catchphrase, and it's like, can you just shut up? I just didn't really care for the guy. Other than that, the film's not really that memorable. The chemistry between the two leads, although I will give them credit for not being, a generic romance story. It's nothing to write home about. The production design's okay enough. I do like the setting of, this island tropical setting. I don't know if they shot in Germany, but it's a nice setting that does remind me of some of the cover arts of the games. It's still bad, but it's not offensively bad. So, as a point for Uwe Boll, I guess. Coming in at number 30 is going to be Monster Hunter, the latest video game adaptation from Mila Jovovich and her husband Paul W.S. Anderson. Coming out in theaters at a time where basically no one was going to the movies, and this one was definitely not one to save it. I didn't check it out when it came out last year, simply because I just had other stuff going on around that time. And also I just had no interest in checking it out, knowing that this is what the same crew did the Resident Evil movies. And this one is just exactly what I expected from these people. It's not as bad as some of the other Resident Evil movies I talked about previously, but it's not good by any means. It's just Mila Jovovich, Tony Jaa, and a few other people that just kind of run around the desert and have it battle monsters. There is some decent chemistry between Mila Jovovich and Tony Jaa. They're not a romantic couple, but I mean, they kind of try to build upon one another and also try to fight one another, and it's kind of entertaining when they're fighting. Although it's frustrating to see so many quick cuts in the action, especially when you have a martial artist like Tony Jaa who can do the stunts himself. The CGI is fine, it's passable, there's nothing overly bad in the movie, but Ron Perlman's makeup is. The story, not really much to write home about. It's just a person gets thrown into a portal and sucks into another world, and then they have to team up with another person from that world, and they have to fight a big monster, and then we're going to set up for a giant sequel that will never come because this movie got banned from China and only made like $11 million worldwide. As it goes, it's just a by-the-books action movie that just so happens to be based on a video game. It's shot decently, has some decent acting, has a few good one-liners here and there. There's nothing overly bad in this movie, it's just nothing to write home about. At number 29, we got Lara Croft Tomb Raider, the very first of the 3 Tomb Raider movies that came out, and this one, surprisingly, I think is the worst one. That usually doesn't happen with a lot of these video game movies. You expect the sequels to be a lot worse, but this is one of the rare ones. But it's still on the top half of this list, which doesn't really mean that's good, but it's not overly terrible. It's a product of its time. It's very goofy, it's very in your face with how just early 2000s it is, with a lot of CGI. Angelina Jolie just like has this crazy hairdo, just like swinging off of hooks in her mansion or whatever. You get Daniel Craig in a really early role back when he was just doing villain stuff like, this and Road to Perdition before he became Bond. I'm trying to be like a modern day goofier Indiana Jones, and for what it is, It's not good, but I mean, you can have fun with it. It's just a film that I haven't really wanted to go back to, you know. There's not a lot that really sticks with me, not a lot that I really found that entertaining about it. You know, again, it's another MacGuffin story. We gotta get these people, you know, we got Angelina Jolie's father, John Voight, you know, who's the main villain of the movie, and he really doesn't steal the screen that much. You get partners involved, and they really don't really stick with you as well. The production design is really fake, the directing isn't that good, the writing is very stale and very dated with some of his lines and dialogue, and I don't know. It's bad, and I do understand why people do enjoy it for how goofy it is. It's just not really my thing. Although I will say Angelina Jolie as Lara Croft isn't really a bad choice. Number 28 is going to be Doom. The best Doom movie, that's something that Doom Annihilation couldn't say. So this one is one of those video game movies that has a bunch of like up-and-coming actors at the time that really exploded. I mean, you had The Rock in a very early role back when he was doing villain roles like the Scorpion and Mummy Returns, before it became, you know, the PG-13 action star we all know today. You got Carl Urban in an early role back when he was doing American accents. Rosamund Pike, the same thing. You can tell that none of them really wanted to be there, or they just need some serious acting classes. Similar to Doom Annihilation, it's not really much of a Doom movie. There are a couple of cool first-person sequences in the film, and it is interesting seeing The Rock become a villain, because I think that when he's a villain, he can either be like really fun, like when he first showed up as Hobbs in Fast 5 and became that antagonist against Vin Diesel, and this one he's just, you know, just kind of does a by-the-books performance as a big bad villain in the third act, and it's just kind of like eh. As a whole, it's just a very service-level sci-fi alien invasion movie, and nothing that I really want to rewatch ever again. It's just there, and that's what it is. Coming in at number 27 is going to be Street Fighter. Again, another one of the classic 90s video game movies that are so bad that it is fun to watch. And I think out of this, Double Dragon and Super Mario Bros., it is the legitimately best one out of the three. Still not a good movie, but I do find it enjoyable. Van Damme has a lot of fun as the main character. You got Raul Julia in his final performance as the main villain of the movie, and it is heartwarming knowing that he did this movie for his kids, and you can tell that they had fun actually playing the role. The action sequences actually do have some fluidity to them, and they actually do have like a dynamic, you know, cross between the editing and the shooting. It's not just a bunch of random quick cuts. But again, the film's incredibly dated. It's not the best on the written structure. As a fighting video game movie, it very much has a very thin plot line that doesn't really know what to do, because it's one of those video games that really doesn't translate that well, especially for the 90s. It's very much they have to make their own stuff, and you can tell. But for what it is, it's definitely a film that I can understand people who are definitely nostalgic of the 90s go back and say, you know what, I had fun with it, I still enjoy it. But I'm not from that era, so it's not really a film that sticks with me that much, but you know, not terrible. Number 26 is going to be Prince of Persia, The Sands of Time, another video game movie with Ben Kingsley. Doesn't seem to learn. So this is a very interesting one, because you can see this is a very high-profile movie. It's by Disney, it's a big budget, Jake Gyllenhaal in the lead role, which did create some controversy about him being a white man playing a Persian, which I understand. But he's good in the movie, and you can tell that he did actually have a passion for the role. He got really ripped for it, and you know, he's Jake Gyllenhaal. You know, he can phone it in and still do better than everybody else in the movie. I do like the production design, I do like the period piece aesthetic of it. You can tell it has that Disney budget that, you know, was given stuff like Lone Ranger in that time period. But once again, it's a very much a MacGuffin storyline. They gotta go after specific objects, like a level in the game, and so they have to do all these different things, gotta get all these different people, and just a lot of the same issues I've talked about in multitude of these video game movies previously. It does the exact same issues, and not that much better. It's entertaining enough in moments, but it's still a bad movie, because it's not a movie that I want to go back and rewatch. It's not a film that I can recall a whole lot of scenes from. It's not a movie that I just don't really enjoy it. That's the point. Number 25, Resident Evil Apocalypse, the first sequel of this franchise, and honestly, it's not a half bad movie. You can tell it tried to channel a little bit more of the game aesthetic in this one, being about that we gotta escape Raccoon City, and we gotta escape all these zombies and the outbreak from the hive. And there are some fun moments in here. I think Mike Epps is actually quite funny in the movie. Mila Jovovich, this was back when she did a lot of her own stunts before, you know, she stopped kind of doing them in the later ones, and you can tell that she does try in this movie. It has a fast pace, doesn't really waste much time trying to get you into the storyline. It knows to deliver zombie action, and does deliver it decently enough, I guess. But there are major issues that do hold the film back for me. Firstly, I don't like the look of the movie. I think it's way too overly blue. I don't know why. It just looks like the ending final fight in Freddy vs. Jason in the real world. Like, why does everything have to be so saturated at night? The plot, once again, very thin, not really that investing. I didn't really care much for the characters. I didn't really find the film that tense or that exciting. I was just kind of going along with it when I was awake. I mean, this movie literally took me 3 times to watch it in a whole sitting. Like, I fell asleep after the first 30 minutes twice. I don't do that often. CGI doesn't really hold up that well. Action, enough. Writing, You know, the storyline, we got saved this little girl and such, and you're like, okay, fine, whatever. As a movie, it's one that you can turn on TV and you can be like, oh, I can waste 90 minutes. It's not the worst Resident Evil film by a mile, but it's certainly not a film that I would say is that memorable or one that I would want to rewatch ever again. Coming in at number 24 is going to be Hitman. Now, this is a video game franchise that I actually recently got into. I recently bought the New World of Assassination trilogy on the PS4. I'm currently like halfway through the first game's campaign. I'm actually quite having fun with it, even though I'm playing it the complete opposite way, where you're supposed to be sneaking around, just going in guns blazing, because I'm that type of gamer. But going to this movie, I was curious, because, you know, this is one of those ones where you're like, why'd they make a Hitman movie like back in, what, 2007? I know the games have existed for like, what, 20 some years, but it just kind of seemed like an oddball, and yeah, this one was definitely an oddball. It's not terrible. I mean, you know, there are some decent action set pieces in here. The film goes by in a little bit of a quick pace. It's shot competently, has some decent dialogue here and there. It has some decent world building in here, but what does kill for me is the fact that Timothy Olyphant is not a good Agent 47. Like, Timothy Olyphant is one of those actors who really does bring his personality to the screen, like in Scream 2, for example. And here, I just don't see Agent 47, I just see Timothy Olyphant that's bald. And that really does take me out of the movie. They try to do this love story with him and the main girl, and it just does not work whatsoever. And the dialogue's not really much better either. The villain, you can throw away. It's just, you know, generic stock, oh, bad businessman, we gotta take him down. It's just another video game movie that I think either was just made too early, and I think you could do a lot better with it in a modern time, which I know there's another modern Hitman film that we'll be getting into later on this list, but, you know, there's a lot of property that you could work as more of a comedy, but they play it so seriously is that it just falls flat and it just doesn't really stick with me that much. Again, it's not terrible, but just nothing special. At number 23 is going to be Lara Croft Tomb Raider: The Cradle of Life. A sequel that for me was actually better than the original. I think this one actually felt more like the games where, you know, you're going to different locations. I think that the setting of, you know, the African jungle fits more for this version of Lara Croft, and I think that Angelina Jolie did this a better job here, mainly because she's able to bounce off Gerard Butler so well in this movie. I think he's way more charismatic than anybody in the first film, and you also get Jason Hansu in here. That's always fun to see. The action is better in this one. I mean, you get Jan de Bont in here, who directed Speed, the best Die Hard knockout of all time. I believe he did the cinematography for the first Die Hard film, which is my favorite film of all time. And I kind of sucked that after that he really didn't get much of a career, and now he's just kind of faded away. This was his very last movie they ever directed. But for what it is, at least this film's not as bad as The Haunting remake with Liam Neeson and Owen Wilson. My god. But once again, it's very dated, very early 2000s, very much style over substance in a lot of ways. Doesn't really capture what really makes the game so much fun. And a lot of the adventure aspects kind of take away by special effects and CGI, which don't really age that well. Once again, the characters aren't great, the writing really isn't that special. Not much to write home about, but you know what? I will say it is better than the first film. At number 22 is going to be Wing Commander, the most generic sci-fi film I've ever seen in my life. It seemed like the director watched Starship Troopers and was like, you know what? I want to do that, but a whole lot worse, and that's what Wing Commander is. It so happens to be based on a video game. You get Freddie Prinze Jr. and you also get Matthew Lillard, so you get, you know, Shaggy and Friend team up in a sci-fi space action film. They have some decent banter between one another. I do think that Matthew Lillard, although his character is annoying, I do like the romance between him and Rosie, and eventually where that goes kind of a little bit of heartbreak. We also get, like, I believe Sarah Snook is the actress who plays the main Wing Commander woman in this movie, you know, the woman that's based off the title, and she's just kind of a bitch about most of the runtime. She doesn't really, like, do much that makes her likable. The biggest Achilles heel of this film is that it just rips off so much, you know, sci-fi properties. It just handpicks every single little bit of mainstream sci-fi property and just puts it into the film. Starship Troopers is definitely a major inspiration on this film, with all, like, the creature effects and, you know, all the aerial things about, you know, mainly being about pilots, which that was kind of half the focus on Starship Troopers. And then you got the aliens in here that are very memorable. They don't really have much of a memorable design. They kind of look like a cat if they were squashed inside that giant George Lopez machine from Shark Boy and Lava Girl. The characters really aren't that investing. A lot of them just aren't really that memorable, and they just don't really get much development. The CGI is nothing special, but I think it still holds up well today, like, what, 22 years later? It tries to cherry pick from so many different sci-fi properties that it just ends up not getting a personality of its own, and just ends up being, it just falls to the wayside so many other sci-fi movies that we've seen before that just kind of go and just dissipate forever. And also the pacing is quite slow. Maybe because this was the last video game movie I watched before I watched a new Mortal Kombat for this list, and I just wanted to get to the new Mortal Kombat, and, you know, this is kind of standing in the way between that. But this film kind of dragged on for so long, and it was only like an hour and 40 minutes. Again, it's nothing terrible, but it's just nothing that I want to watch ever again. Number 21 is going to be Hitman Agent 47, the modern Hitman film that is slightly better than the previous Hitman movie, but not by a whole margin. I do think Rupert Friend, who plays Agent 47 in this film, is a lot better than Timothy Olyphant's 47. Maybe because he's the last known actor, so I don't see the guy from Scream 2 like I did with Timothy Olyphant. But for here, he does look more like the 47 from the modern games. He acts more like 47, less emotion, which is good for the character. He fits more, and also the main, you know, journey he goes with this girl. I do respect the fact they don't really just do a generic romance thing. It's more about, like, we gotta track down this government thing. Very generic stuff. You get Zachary Quinto in here as a villain who doesn't really have a lot of presence because he's not a big dude, so when he has that force, you know, they have to explicitly say that he has an ectoskeleton or something like that, like a titanium skeleton, that he has to be scary, and it's not really that effective. effective. The action's fine enough, but nothing really spectacular in my opinion. There are a couple of fun Fast and Furious moments, like there's this scene where like a bunch of cars stuck hooks in, Agent 47's car. It kind of reminded me of that scene in, Fate of the Furious, later on with Vin Diesel. And it's decent enough trying to be like a knockoff of it. Plus, I do think it does celebrate more what made the game so good is that it does have more comedy in it. Like, you get more shots of like, you see a toaster in a bathtub with a rubber ducky, and there's like little shots like that do pay homage to the games. I do respect the film for doing that. The issue that kills this movie is the writing, and this is the same writer that did the previous Hitman movie, which makes absolutely no sense why Fox would rehire this person to do the new Hitman movie. It's like if Marvel Studios hired Josh Trank to do the new Fantastic Four film for their MCU reboot. It makes no sense. You can tell that he wanted to be more self-aware with the games and such, but for the most part, it just feels like they're retreading the same formula and makes the film kind of boring result when you watch these films back to back, like what I did. And overall, it just doesn't really stick with me that much. I mean, it has a lot of the same issues as all the other video game movies. And again, not great characters, not great writing, especially not great writing. Directing, serviceable enough. Twists, predictable. Set up for a sequel that we never get. It's better than the previous Hitman movie, but I don't think it's as good as it should have been. Number 20, we get In the Name of the King. The best Uwe Boll film by far. It's actually almost mediocre. For that alone, I think Uwe Boll should be given an Oscar, at least with help out the ratings. But joking aside, I do think this film is actually a lot better than I expected it to be. I was watching a lot of reviews and such, and people were saying how bad it was, and I was like, okay, preparing for the worst, and honestly, it's not that bad. You can tell that this Uwe Boll's biggest film he was trying to do is like Lord of the Rings. You can tell that Uwe Boll had the biggest budget of all of his movies here because it has quite a star-studded cast. I mean, you get Jason Statham, you get Burt Reynolds, you get Matthew Lillard, you get Ron Perlman, so much more. The first big thing I'll say positive-wise about this film is that the choreography is actually quite good. You can tell that Jason Statham and a lot of the other actors actually did do their own stunts, because a lot of them are in the shot where they're fighting in scenes, and it's not like they're shooting from behind and such. The issue that does kind of kill is the fact that a lot of the editing is just quite bad and just cuts away so much that like you really can't enjoy the choreography that's on screen. Uwe Boll is trying to do his version of Lord of the Rings, so you could definitely tell it has that fantasy feel to it, and it feels like a generic fantasy film. The acting, it's fine enough. Jason Statham does fine as Farmer. That's his actual character name, which is just a stupid idea. He has this serious journey about trying to save his wife after his son is killed by the main villain of the movie, and that's kind of the driving force we get throughout the rest of the runtime. Production design is actually quite good. You can see there's a lot of actors on set, and you can tell they actually made sets and didn't just like film in the forest with a bunch of people. You get the woman who played Blood Rain, who's like one of like these tree people who like swing on vines and like take out soldiers and stuff, which is pretty cool. And you know what? It's almost a mediocre movie. It's almost a mediocre movie. A couple things really do drag down the film. The music is terrible in this movie. I mean, it is terrible. It is so melodramatic and is so trying to make you feel emotions that is so distracting from the movie itself. Like, you're trying to play a scene and you can tell that the score is like in the audio mix that's like on the top of all the dialogue because you can barely hear any of the people going on. And this type of music is very much like knockoff low-rank Kevin McLeod and just copyright-free type stuff that just distract from what's going on in the scene because it's just so overbearing. And it just constantly just has the same tracks throughout the entire 2-hour runtime, which just leads to a different issue with the fact that the film really does feel long. You can feel the runtime with this movie. And it's not a complex story. It's just like, Jason Statham's going on revenge. Matthew Lillard's trying to poison his uncles and become the king. There's a couple other things going on with the villain, and that's about it. And it just feels so much like extra padding that doesn't need to be in the movie. Not to mention a lot of the acting was not that good either. Mainly from a lot of the lesser known actors, and Matthew Lillard cannot do an English accent. But that's all I think is Uwe Boll's best film, which is saying quite a lot. Number 19 for me is going to be Resident Evil Extinction, my favorite sequel in the Resident Evil franchise. This was definitely the most memorable of all of them, simply because I think the artistic direction of the film is definitely the most memorable of all of them. You get this knockoff Mad Max style to it where, Alice is teaming up with a bunch of other people. You get Mike Epps returning from Apocalypse in here, and he's not really as good as he was in Apocalypse. But you know what? I do like the production design of it. I do think that it looks quite good, especially when Alice and her convoy go to Las Vegas and it's all distraught and destroyed. It kind of reminds me of the alternate ending of Army of Darkness, whenever Ash sleeps too late and he wakes up and whirls in chaos. Action not half bad. There's a couple of memorable things whenever they're scaling, I believe it's the Eiffel Tower, and they have to snipe out zombies. That's pretty fun. It has a good enough pace, and one that I can tolerate. But once again, the acting's not that good. I didn't really find the comedy as funny. Mike Epps doesn't really do a whole lot here. I really don't like movies when you get a big convoy, and now a whole lot of people die within the first 2 acts, and they're like, oh shit, we need a body count. So they just kill everybody in the last 10 minutes like a massacre. The whole side plot with Dr. Isaacs and him trying to train zombies and such just doesn't really interest me that much. And just a lot of padding that just kind of goes through the runtime that I just didn't really enjoy that much either. The writing is the best. The directing is kind of inconsistent inconsistent. Sometimes the action is really good, sometimes the action isn't. But I will say it is the best sequel of the series in my opinion. Number 18, we get Ratchet and Clank. This one, I remember when it came out. I think it came out like right before Captain America Civil War came out, and that greatly overshadowed this one. And I'm not somebody who has played the games, although I would like to play them because I do like 3D platformers and this seems very much up my alley. But from what I've gone from this movie, it's very much just a generic kids movie. You know, bad guys trying to destroy the world, and then, you know, our main heroes trying to, you know, it kind of reminded me a lot of Captain America almost. Like when Steve Rogers, when he was skinny, and he's like, oh, I want to go fight for this war. And then you get people who are like, you can't do this, kid. You're not strong enough. And then he has to learn his self-worth. And he teams up with Clank, and, you know, they meet. And a lot of the just cliches that we've seen from dozens of other movies before. The comedy really isn't that highbrow either. No really big laughs I got from this film. Voice acting is actually fine. Actually, it has quite a good cast. Like Paul Giamatti's the villain in this movie. He actually has quite a personality. They get John Goodman in here and Sylvester Stallone. But I just really didn't care for much in this movie. Like Ratchet and Clank, they were serviceable enough, but I just didn't really care for them that much. It's a kids movie, so you know that not a lot of tension's going to be in the movie, and it's just like, it doesn't really do anything that stands out. It's not a Pixar film. It's not even a DreamWorks movie. It's just a very by the numbers direct-to-video film that somehow got a theatrical release. It doesn't really like show a good job of like what the games could be like, in my opinion. It does look accurate to the PS4 game from what I've seen from gameplay footage, but it doesn't really tell me like what Ratchet and Clank are and like what the style of the gameplay is. It's very much just a generic sci-fi space action film. It's trying to be like a kiddie Starship Troopers, and it just doesn't really work that well in my opinion. Coming in number 17 is going to be Resident Evil, the one that started it all. For me, the best film of the Resident Evil movie series, but it's still not good. I will say this retained most of the horror elements of the actual games, being more isolated, being only about a small group of characters trying to escape a situation about the Hive. As infection spreading and picking off our characters one by one, and does some very memorable moments, mainly the laser grid sequence. I do think Mila Jovovich does the best as she does as Alice in this first film. And once again, you can tell a lot of these actors did do their own stunts, and it's actually quite impressive. Is the story great? No. Is the acting great? Not that really. Are the scares there? Sometimes, but a lot of jump scares usually. Again, I don't really like this movie. It's still not that good of a movie, but I will say it's a lot more competently put together and a lot more about the spirit of the games than a lot of the other sequels. It has some good direction, some good score, a lot of memorable shots and close-ups and panning movements that I'll remember from this movie. But this is still a film that I wish never got any sequels to it, because I never thought it deserved a sequel, let alone 6 installments. I really do hope that the Resident Evil reboot does learn the mistakes of this franchise and go back to what made the game successful in the first place. But we'll see what happens. Number 16 is going to be the Angry Birds movie. I will never forget myself for how high I put this in its sequel up in this list, but this list kind of sucks. This is kind of like the first one on this list. I will say is actually kind of okay. I won't consider it to be a bad movie, which kind of sucks me because I really didn't want to see this movie. I think it's the only film I've seen in my entire life where I was actually asked to go see it in the theater and I refused to go see it because I just didn't want to go check it out. And I ended up watching it on my phone like a couple like months later or so that summer. And I thought, oh, okay, it's actually somewhat decent. Good voice acting from like Jason Sudeikis and Josh Gad, Dan McBride as our main characters. I do like the story about, Red, our main character, is kind of like an outcast in society, and like, he's always mad, and the little bird Phil's always happy, and like that kind of clashing tones is always kind of funny. I do think it has like it's satire humor. I think actually does work quite well. The animation's pretty decent. I think the story for a game based on an app I actually think is quite well. And the whole story about these pigs coming to the bird island and Red's like the only one that can notice it. Has to team up with his new friends, take him down. Fun enough storyline, very cliche, but you know what? It works for a kids movie. Has some funny gags. I do like the eagle that we see later in the movie, who's like this big hero, and then he ends up being a slob, which again, a big cliche that we've seen a bunch before, but it still works here. The humor on and off again. I do like the satire stuff, but it also is played with a bunch of kiddie humor because it's a kids movie. The emotions don't really drive home that much. Again, it's not great by any means, but you know what? For what it is, I do enjoy it enough. And if I was ever forced to watch this like for babysitting and such, I wouldn't be against it. It's not the worst kids movie that I've ever seen. Far from it. Number 15 is going to be House of the Dead 2. Now, see what's the House of the Dead, I'm pretty shocked how high it is on this list because, looking at something like Alone in the Dark 2, another, Uwe Boll sequel to a movie that he didn't direct. And that ended up just being so bad, even worse than the first film. And this one This is a complete opposite approach. I think it's a lot better than the first film. It's a lot more about the zombie outbreak and about these soldiers having to take, these zombies out on the college campus. There's a lot of good humor in the mix between the soldiers, a lot of good, self-aware humor. Actually just connects to the first film with the main surviving character returning and such. That makes more than just a non-sequel that they just slapped House of the Dead on to get extra DVD sales. No, it is actual continuation. There's a good practical gore in here and it's a lot of fun. The film has a pretty fast pace. It has a pretty simple story, it runs with it, it knows exactly what it is, it knows what you're here for, and you know what? It does it pretty well. Again, it's not highbrow entertainment, it's nothing that you're gonna, walk away being changed of, but for what it is as a goofy little zombie movie, it does well. Number 14 is gonna be The King of Fighters. Once again, another big fighting video game movie. This is like the last one I watched before I watched the new Mortal Kombat. And at that point, when you get so many ones like Tekken, Double Dragon, Street Fighter, the original Mortal Kombat, when you get this in the mix, it's just, one that I will say does stand out from the pack, but it does have a lot of cliches in it. I do like Mikey Q quite a bit when she's ever on screen, mainly in like Live Free or Die Hard. And here, she's not great, but I mean, she does serve well as the lead character. You get David Leitch in here, which is kind of strange because I know him as a director for, Deadpool 2 and Hobbs and Shaw, and I believe he was one of the directors in the first John Wick, and he's here like as a, generic FBI agent, but they actually have some fun banter between one another. And you got other characters thrown in the mix too. You know what, like, I had fun enough with this movie. The choreography is actually there and actually is quite well done. Editing could have been better, but, it's not horrible. The plot moves its wheels, although it's a little convoluted with how it breaks the rules, where you have this earpiece and it transports you to a different world and you get like an entirely different costume and you fight. A little weird, but you know what? For what it is, I enjoyed it. It's dumb fun. And for a fighting video game movie, that's all it needed to be. Number 13, we got The Angry Birds Movie 2. A sequel that I did not expect, and honestly, I didn't expect it to be better than the first one. Again, it's not highbrow entertainment, but I had a good time with this movie. Not by a huge margin from the first film, but I enjoyed it. It does kind of the typical sequel route where it's like we get another big bad, and Tiffany Haddish launching these ice balls in the Birdland, and now Red has a team up with King Pig, and now they have to do the thing where the villain and the hero team up, and they have to stop the main other villain of the movie. Again, cliche, but I thought that their banter was actually quite fun and actually was kind of the best part of the film. There were some clever comedic bits throughout the movie. The animation is still pretty good. The film has a fast pace and, it doesn't really waste much time trying to get into what it sets out to be. Just a fun little adventure with these characters, and overall, I had more of a fun experience than I did with the first film. Still, a lot of the same issues I had with the first one are still here, and it definitely did not need to exist. I definitely say my life wouldn't have been that different had this film never been made. But for what it is, it's fine. Number 12 is going to be Final Fantasy The Spirits Within. This is a pretty decent flick. The animation in this film is actually quite good. I can't imagine how mind-blowing this would have been back like 20 years ago. And even now, it still looks pretty good. You can tell that Sony spent their money well on the animation, although I still don't get why they just want to have done this in live action. It still looks good today. It has good visuals, has a good enough pace. You understand what's going on, you understand the characters' motivations. The music is actually quite good in here. The directing's solid. The writing and dialogue are actually somewhat decent. It's a well put together movie. It's just that it's just another, generic sci-fi stuff. I haven't played any of the Final Fantasy games, so, I'm not super well versed in the universe, but this doesn't remind me of Final Fantasy. It just reminds me a lot of, Wing Commander and other sci-fi movies that came out around the same time. I really don't understand the connection between this and the other games. I don't know, it just feels so it's like a cousin of Final Fantasy that it feels weird that it shares the same name. But for what it is, I will say I enjoyed it decently enough. Number 11 is going to be DOA, Dead or Alive. I expected this film to be absolutely terrible. It's an extremely stupid movie, but it knows what it is. I've asked all the generic, bland, by-the-numbers, generic action films and fighting flicks and sci-fi movies. This one is meant to be just an over-the-top movie with a bunch of over-the-top characters and dialogue and acting, and again, it's not high art, but it gives you what you want from a Dead or Alive movie if you want that. You get a lot of fighting, you get a lot of sexy shots, and you don't get much more than that. The plot's thin, the characters are thin, both, literally and physically, but I will say, I do think that the performances aren't really half bad for what they're going for. I do like the banter between our main leads in the movie. I think that the fighting sequence is actually quite fun, the choreography is actually quite there, and you can tell the actors are actually putting a lot of effort into the roles. The lighting's quite good, and it's kind of refreshing to see like a video game movie actually having lighting to it, not just trying to be like some dark, serious movie that isn't animated. It keeps it at a quick pace, it keeps it entertaining, it gives you what you want, and you know what? I can't ask more from a video game movie. Now we're in the top 10, baby, so kicking off our top 10 with number 10, Warcraft. Now, I'm not a big fan of RPGs or Dungeons and Dragons and that type of stuff, not many card games, so I never really got into the World of Warcraft phase, but I did check out this film because everyone was saying, you know, it's one of the better video game movies that came out, and I checked it out when it came out, like, so 2016, and you know what, looking back on it, it's a pretty decent flick. As a fantasy guy, I'm not a big fan of that genre. You know, The Lord of the Rings, they're great movies, but they don't really stick with me that much. I wouldn't call them my favorite films of all time. You know, I tried getting into the Game of Thrones, couldn't really get into it after one episode. I'm very picky with TV shows, and there's a lot of other stuff, unless it's something like superhero related or something that like ties into other genres, like Harry Potter. I just don't really get invested in the lore, the characters, and this film kind of suffers the same issue of like, I'm not super invested in the world, but it gives you what you want from a film like this. You get your big action scenes, the effects are actually quite good, and you can tell where they put the money. Acting's decent. It's just, I think the pace is a little too bogged down with all the stuff going on and all the lore, and have to explain everything in the, you know, the war between the humans and the orcs and just all this type of stuff that bores me in a lot of other fantasy films because they're so self-serious in a lot of ways that I just don't really get that invested. But you know, this one actually has some decent moments throughout the runtime. It kept me entertained enough. And if we ever did get a sequel to this, I would check it out. Number 9 is going to be Need for Speed. Now, this is actually a first time watch for this list, and I'm actually quite excited for it. I remember the trailers when this first came out, like when I was like in 5th grade, I think, when this came out. I was like, oh, okay, it looks fine enough. I knew of Need for Speed, but it was one of a plethora of racing games that people knew of and were playing. You know, you got Forza, Gran Turismo. I was more of a Mario Kart type person. But, you know, a couple years ago, I watched Breaking Bad for El Camino, and I became a huge fan of that show. It's now been my favorite show of all time. And so knowing Aaron Paul as Jesse Pinkman, you know, knowing him as now him trying to be like a, you know, action star is weird. I'm like, how does this work out? Because, you know, he's not really known for doing anything else beyond Jesse Pinkman. And going to this movie, I will say it's a little weird, you know, him trying to gruff up his voice, being like, hey, what's up, I'm this guy. And it seems like a kid trying to imitate you at the playground school. He's still decent in the flick, but it's a little bit weird. The cast was actually quite good. I didn't really know how many people were in this film beyond Aaron Paul, and actually it's quite a stacked cast. You get Rami Malek in here before he became big with Mr. Robot. You get Dominic Cooper, you get Imogen Poots, you get Michael Keaton in a weird role where he's just like this radio announcer guy. And basically it's just like, you know, your stock revenge road trip story about, you know, Aaron Paul gets wronged by Dominic Cooper, and then he goes to prison for a couple years. Now he's got to go on this cross-country trip to this big race where he has to stop Dominic Cooper and, you know, get revenge for him killing his friend and such. And for what it is, it's serviceable. I enjoy it. I think that the banter between a lot of the other characters is fun enough. Rami Malek, I think, is the best in the film, especially since he has the best scene in the film where he just like strips naked in his workplace and just, you know, decides to leave it after he gets picked up by Kid Cudi. I think he has the best comedic aspects of the film. Racing is actually quite good, and you can tell that the actors actually did race. They actually did their own car stunts, which is kind of cool. It's definitely a knockoff Fast and Furious film, but I mean, I like Fast and Furious, so getting more of that, I'm not going to complain about it. Again, it's a lot of cliches, a lot of generic, early summer blockbuster stuff that's still in spring that you expect from a lot of these types of films. It doesn't break any new ground whatsoever, and it's definitely one that will probably forget in the back of your mind. But compared to a lot of the other films on this list, yeah, this top 10 really isn't that stacked, but compared to everything else beyond this list, I'd rather rewatch this one than anything else below it. Number 8 is going to be Rampage. Once again, another movie starring The Rock, trying to be this PG-13 action star, and it's okay. A term I've been saying a lot. It's, you know, decent, okay, fine. I was talking about in the previous list about Dark Knight and Avengers, some of my favorite films of all time, and now I'm talking about a Dwayne Johnson movie that nobody remembers that came out 3 years ago. It's fine for what it is, you know, it's a typical summer blockbuster type film where you get, you know, Dwayne Johnson and, you know, this ape where the ape has to fight these monsters, and it's fine for what it is, you know. The Rock has charisma, it's fun, it's enjoyable, it's tough to see on the screen. Although I will say, I do like the Kid Cudi song in this one, and Need for Speed. It's kind of weird that both these films are stacked against each other, but you know, Kid Cudi, I do like your tying songs to video game movies. Number 7 is going to be Tekken. Tekken is a fighting video game movie that I will say stands above most of the pack. I do like the fact that it feels kind of like a low-rent version of The Running Man with Arnold Schwarzenegger, in that, you know, you get this one nobody who gets thrown into this tournament and it has to, you know, go against multiple other fighters, work his way to the top, and, you know, eventually gets up to the bad guy, Kazuya, in the movie, and now he has to fight him, and, you know, he eventually wins. It's a simple story, you know, you get a simple romance between him and, you know, this main girl in the movie. Their chemistry is actually quite decent in the film. I just like the fact that it's actually rated R, and you get to actually see some blood. Choreography is actually quite decent, quite well shot. shots. The issue is just that a lot of the character writing is quite flat. The villain and a lot of the lore they try to explore in this Tekken world just feels generic. A lot of other sci-fi stuff we've seen before about, like, you know, this militaristic future where, you know, you can't do certain things, you have to do contestant things where you could win certain prizes, but it's all a scam, you know. We've seen multiple sides of that before, like RoboCop with all the satire with that. Same thing with Starship Troopers, I've mentioned multiple times in this list. Or Blade Runner or Total Recall. Definitely just taking hints from those movies and just kind of sprinkling it across that in here. Again, nothing to really write home about, but I enjoyed it. Number 6 is going to be Silent Hill. Probably one of the more faithful video game adaptation movies that have come out in the past ever. Now, I haven't really played any of the Silent Hill games simply because they're kind of hard to find, and because Konami just doesn't really treat their re-releases with the best respect. But I did pick up the DVD a couple years ago and I wanted to check it out, and it's actually pretty good. I think that they do recreate a lot of the shots from the game that are iconic, like, you know, the woman walking and you see, like, the Silent Hill town. They do recreate a lot of, like, the iconic images from the game. You know, you get the underground hell, which is, like, dirty and damp and rusty, and just, like, you get the nurse with, like, twisted face, which is actually quite iconic in the series. The fog, and it just, like, recreates a lot of the atmosphere of that game so well. From what I've seen in walkthroughs and such, there's some pretty good atmosphere in it. There's, like, a lot of good score, some pretty good direction. You can tell this was made by fans. This wasn't made by, like, a studio executive hiring some guy who's just, you know, a work-for-hire director. You can tell this was made by someone who's passionate about the games. My issue is that the story isn't that investing. Like, the whole thing about this little girl who's possessed because she was, like, burned in the fire by these other Japanese schoolgirls, and now, like, she's after, you know, Radha Mitchell's daughter. And Radha Mitchell's not that great of a lead in this movie. None of the action's really that great either. The scares, there are a couple of decent ones, but for the most part, a lot of jump scares, and they just don't really stick with me. The film really never got me that tense or that excited. It just kind of gave me interested. I was like, you know what, I want to see more from the production design team of this, because it was just really well put together. You know, whenever this gets rebooted, I would like to see an updated version of this where it tells a little bit more of an interesting story with better actors, and just, but keep that production design team, because I think they did a great job with, like, recreating the atmosphere and the feel and the look of what Silent Hill is. Number 5 for me is going to be Sonic the Hedgehog, one of the more recent video game movies that actually did do well before the pandemic shut it down. This was a movie that I really wasn't that hyped for. I was like, is this going to be a dumb kids movie? And I only kind of walked into it because it was a big movie. I used to go to big movies a lot back when, you know, movie theaters actually open. Slowly they're starting to reopen now, but, you know, I watch a big movie every single week, and this was like the big movie that came out that week on Valentine's Day, I believe, last year. And so I was like, okay, that's kind of weird. But for what it is, I actually had a pretty decent time with it. I think it's a good kids movie. I do gotta give respect to the filmmakers for actually redesigning Sonic, because I think he looks a lot better. I think that because of that, it's easier to accept what's going on. It does have a lot of cliches about being set in the real world, and now we gotta go on this cross-country trip to, was it California? To, you know, get Sonic's rings back. A very generic story, which honestly has a lot of plot holes. Like, Sonic, he can run fast, but the only reason why he stays with James Marsden is because, oh, he's lonely. I get it, but I mean, you're in an urgent situation. The CG effects are actually quite good. Jim Carrey definitely steals the show in this movie as Dr. Robotnik, and he just gets a lot of time to just be his old self again after being gone for so many years. The action's fun. I actually think James Marsden does play off Sonic very well for a CGI character that you really can't act off physically. The action's fun. It keeps at a fast pace. It does have issues of being very cliche and has a lot of, like, forced world setup and a lot of, you know, obvious things that you know what to expect for a kids movie. Yes, it doesn't break any new mold with that, but I will say it does kind of break the mold with the video game trend and actually being a decent flick and better than most, in my opinion, and being in some of the right direction of what we can see for future video game movies and future sequels in this franchise. They just need to tweak some of the story moments that actually, you know, give Sonic more to do in his own world. Coming in number 4 is going to be from 1995. A Paul W.S. Anderson video game movie is actually pretty decent. Now, this was actually a first time watch for this list, along the other 2 Mortal Kombat films, the big theatrical ones anyways. So I don't have the nostalgia that a lot of people do have for this movie, but I will say, it's still a pretty fun movie. Like what I talked about with Sonic and Silent Hill, this does feel like made by people who actually do like the games. And for a 90s video game movie, it's definitely better than pretty much all of them. You know, this one actually did translate the game, which was very limited at the time, to the big screen in the best way possible. You get likable characters in here. You get Christopher Lambert as Raiden, which I know is kind of racially insensitive nowadays, but he still does pretty good. You get Liu Kang, you get Johnny Cage, you get Sonya, who's like, what is it, the teacher Billy Madison plays her. You get Shang Tsung, who really is a lot of fun in this movie, and it just like embraces what makes Mortal Kombat. You get the tournament, you get the fights, you get the one-liners, and that's all you need. You know, this movie definitely has dated aspects. It has a lot of really terrible CGI. Nothing as bad as Annihilation, but still quite outdated. That like Goro, like that claymation effect is weird. The set design isn't really the best. You can tell it's a lot of the same stuff over and over again. Bunch of rocks and stuff. Okay, cool. As a quick pace, it's a lot of fun. I don't really mind the fact that it's PG-13 because I think if it was rated R, it would just kind of feel out of place for the tone of this movie. Its story, not the best, but I mean, again, it's a Mortal Kombat film. What do you want? The techno theme is here in all swing. It's a fun movie, and I still enjoy it, even though I don't have nostalgia for it. I still think it's pretty good. Despite I don't have any nostalgia for this, I will say I still had a good time with this movie, and honestly, I think it's better than most video game movies still today. Coming in at number 3 is going to be Pokemon Detective Pikachu. Similar to Sonic, this is not really a live-action CGI hybrid where you get Justice Smith, who played the really annoying intern from Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom, who's a lot better in this movie. And they do have good chemistry, which for a buddy cop movie, that is vital to the story and it's vital to the movie. And when you do like both protagonists and you do like their banter and chemistry, it definitely boosted the film, and I had a pretty decent time with it. All the Pokemon designs all look fantastic in my opinion. The CG is really well done. It has a fun story, although it's a very cliche road trip movie that we've seen tons before. Even Sonic copied this. The comic's pretty fun for the most part, in between, Justice Smith acting with Pikachu being there. And similar to James Marsden, I do gotta give respect for Justice Smith for acting against, a CGI creature that he wasn't with on sets. It made me believe their chemistry, and actually did take some twists and turns in the storyline where I didn't see coming. It doesn't break any new ground, but I had a fun time with it, and we do get a sequel in the near future. I'm down for it. Coming in at number 2 is going to be Tomb Raider, the much needed reboot of the Angelina Jolie movies, and I think this is a lot better than people give it credit for. Is it great? No, but honestly, this is what I wanted for a modern Tomb Raider. Alicia Vikander does a lot better in the role as terms of being a more realistic Lara Croft. Feels a lot more like Uncharted in my opinion, but I love the Uncharted games, so that's nothing but a positive in my opinion. You get Walton Goggins in here, and I think he has a lot of fun. Alicia Vikander and his chemistry between, the boat captain in the movie that, follows her, they have pretty good chemistry. Nick Frost has some good one-liners in here. The action set pieces are quite fun. I do like the fact they shot on location. I do like the fact that Lara Croft has to use her skills to outsmart her enemies in this one. Like, she uses a lot of different weapons in this movie, from arrows to guns. She has it all, not to mention that she does outsmart in different ways as well. Can they approve of the sequel? Yes. But for me, I thought this was a lot better than the previous Angelina Jolie movies. I can't wait to see what comes next. But coming in first place, number 1, is going to be 2021. Yes, the brand new movie on this list is the best video game movie in my opinion. Yay! Does it deserve a standing ovation? No. But I think, once again, similar to Tomb Raider, I think this film's getting a lot more hate than it deserves. A lot of people are trashing this film, and there are some people that love it. It's very divisive right now, and for what it is, I enjoyed it. I talked about it multiple times on this list. For what someone was going out to do, I enjoyed it. This movie all it needed to do was deliver the gore, deliver the fights, deliver the acting at least somewhat, give somewhat of a plot structure and some lore, but for the most part just have a good fun time. And I watched this in an Dolby theater and I had a blast with it. The gore and the fatalities are great on screen. I think the gore is a really great mix of practical and CG effects where it seems a little bit seamless. Not a flawless victory per se, but it's something that I still think is pretty enjoyable. The acting I think is pretty good across the board. Really enjoyed Kane in this movie. Everyone praises him for his one-liners and his banter between just being such a dick on screen. I think it's very enjoyable. Joe Taslim, I think you pronounce his name, as Sub-Zero. Great. I think he's great as like the Terminator 1000, just going against anybody and just destroying them in their path. And Scorpion also, although it makes no sense why he is able to come back and be resurrected, their fights are still pretty fun. And getting on the fights, I thought a lot of people were criticizing how badly edited the movie was, and I just didn't really see that. Is it edited seamlessly? No. But I will say, compared to stuff like In the Name of the King 3, where it was just a bunch of people like throwing swords around and jittery camera and just people kicking each other, the fact that you can actually see the choreography on screen is a lot more than just, just people just wailing around. I like Sonya Blade in this movie. I thought she was a lot better than the original. I really enjoyed Jax also. Kung Lao has the best fatality of the entire movie. I just really enjoyed being around these people and around this setting. Are the villains great? Not really. I do think that Shang Tsung is, a far cry from the original movie, as in terms of performance and presence. And I definitely felt like they were shoehorning the villains in this movie. Like they needed to have fatalities, so they were just like, oh, let's montage a bunch of them at the very end. But I had fun with them, It gave me what I want. I wanted fights, and they give it at least consistently throughout the runtime. And honestly, Cole Young, I didn't mind him as a protagonist. Is he great? No. But for what the movie was as a plot device to, lead him through our world and care about his family, he did a decent job about that, and if they could improve upon his character in a sequel, I would be down for that. The movie was consistently entertaining, it had good one-liners, it had good costume design. Is it great? No, because it definitely has a lot of plot holes and a lot of issues in terms of, certain roles that are just randomly introduced, like people can be resurrected from the dead somehow, talking about how death's just another portal to a different world or something like that. Like how people can be like born with the tattoo of, you know, the Mortal Kombat symbol, but Scorpion's didn't go away when he was killed by Sub-Zero. Makes no sense. And there are definitely other things that are just randomly introduced in this movie that like make no sense to the average person who isn't really big on Mortal Kombat, and that's definitely a thing. This film is basically for fans, or people that at least commonly know of what the Mortal Kombat lore is. If you're walking into this movie not really knowing much about the lore and the characters, you'll definitely be lost in it. The film definitely has room for improvement with a sequel and this franchise going down the road, which is another kind of issue where they kind of end on a cliffhanger like the original Mortal Kombat. But for what it is, I had a good time with it because it gave me the gore for a good R-rated Mortal Kombat movie, gave me fun characters, gave me a fast pace, gave me a fun story that was completely told by a first-time director who actually does a lot more than I would expect for a first-time director. I had a good time with it, and I cannot wait to see what comes out of this universe next. Well, that was quite the list. So if you made it up to this point in the video, I hope you enjoyed me slowly breaking my psyche down over the course of however long this video will end up being. But regardless, I'm glad to say that this is now going to be behind me, and I just cannot wait to relax after this video drops and just play some good games. But if you want to leave your ranking of all these video game movies, or the ones that you've seen, leave them down in the comments because I would be interested to see what they are. Also, please remember to like, share, and subscribe for more content. These genre rankings don't come easy, guys, and getting some audience engagement would really help out this video finding an audience. I got nothing else to say at this point. I've really worn myself out. I really need to go to bed. But as always, I'm CB Productions, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace out.